Hey everybody, welcome to Positively Psych with Rod Loudon. Today's guest is currently a senior vice president at Concord Music Publishing. He's an A&R and artist development kind of guy there. And he's been in the music industry for all his adult life, uh, from working at ASCAP, being on board of directors for like the Grammy Museum and I believe the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's the author of a couple of great books that I highly suggest that you read. Under the Big Black Sun, that he wrote with John Doe and friends, and the follow-up, More Fun in the New World. And congratulations on getting the Grammy nomination for the book Under the Big Black Sun, best spoken word book. I think you lost to Carol Burnett. Anyway, welcome to Positively Psyched, Mr. Tom DeSavia.
Good to see you, Rod. It's been too long, my friend. Thanks for
Yeah, it has.
having us.
I think it was at the ELO concert, I think.
We ran into
was,
each other outside of ELO, which was a great show. But
that was a great show.
Yeah.
Fantastic show.
Oh my God, he's so good.
Yeah, that was just a wonderful show. So, you've had a long career. You started out working for a small magazine, Cashbox, I believe, as an intern, and managed to work your way up to being an editor there and writer. And from there, you went to Elektra Records as A&R. And I'm curious, I know we've talked about this, some of the bands that you signed. Tell me about the process of signing a band.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny. So my career started, I wanted to be a journalist, and then I worked at a magazine when I was 19 and didn't like that, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then someone said, oh, there's this career called A&R. Kind of explained it to me. I'm like, I want to do that. I had no idea what it was. The reason I don't work for a label anymore and I work for a publisher now, the process of signing an artist, um, and I know this podcast has a psychological bent, so I'll just talk about mine. It's exhausting, and it was.
Yes.
As Joyce, I was saying, it's sort of getting married, and I would say the process of signing a band and making a record and getting it out takes about 9 months. And I always say it's like having a baby, and then your baby is meant to be really successful and good looking and charming immediately out of the womb.
Right.
And it was funny. And so for me, who my tastes run a little bit left of center, not necessarily avant-garde, but not necessarily every about 12 years, popular culture circles back to what I like, and then I sort of feel like I belong. And then the rest of the time, I'm just sort of clinging on, white knuckling it with the bands I've signed and going, let's wait till we get to that point. So, um, signing a band is it's a courtship, and it's getting mutual trust. And it's funny, I always say there's really well, there's more than two, but for this conversation, I'll say there's two kinds of A&R people. Um, the only one that should probably exist, which is not me, which is musicians and artists and players and really, I think the greatest time of the industry is when you really had musicians doing A&R, because they could really know how to relate, how to uh, make a record and come in with, either, arrangement ideas or song ideas, or, really get in there and cut it apart. And my role was never really Svengali. I was really a fan who got in this role. So my version of A&R is I'd always found someone who was, anyone I've ever worked with has sort of known who they wanted to be.
Right.
I mean, they didn't just come to me and went like, I have a good voice. What should I do with it? Or I kind of like playing music. What should I do with it? And there's a lot of A&R people that can be like, oh my gosh, you're great. Let's help develop you into that. So I always worked with people that were really, if not fully formed musically, because they might have been really young when they were starting out, they were sort of fully formed in their mind.
Right.
And so if they were driving down a road and I kind of knew what the destination was, then I'd love to get involved with them, because I'm like, okay, I could ride shotgun. and we could do this together. And my job really became making sure they stayed on point, making sure they kept their vision
Right.
and kept going with it.
Stayed in their lane and
Yeah, and because there's so many distractions. I mean, you're a
oh
musician, you know all the
yeah.
distractions that come, and you know, like, and my job is to keep a musician to stay excited when maybe someone's at a show and gives them a side look at one song, and they're going, okay, we have to throw it out. I'm like, no, that might have like literally just been they had a bad bite of their sandwich. Like, it's like stay focused and keep going.
Right.
And so everyone I've really worked with, and it's funny, the very first band I signed almost 30 years ago, 29 years ago as an A&R person, I still work with them. I've signed them to publishing deals twice since. And so a lot of the artists I find, when you find them and you quite honestly just fall in love, and it's a mutually, beneficial and empathetic relationship, you wind up working with them forever. Sometimes
Right.
professionally, in the
Right.
case where I do have some people still in under the corporate umbrella I'm in now. And then in a lot of cases, it's just you just keep working with them, even if it's
Yeah.
not
And I think you just
official.
didn't you just re-sign Social Distortion?
Social Distortion just redid. So yeah, there's a number of acts. This band, the Old 97s, is one I was talking
Right.
about. Like I've signed them 3 times, I think. And we're going to do a new deal. Um, but there's these uh, yeah, when it works, um, it's I always say it's really like a relationship. And sometimes you get in the relationship and you're like, okay, we're gonna like live together metaphorically forever. And sometimes you get in a relationship and sometimes it's like, okay, they've grown, they need to go explore something else. But you wind up sort of in their community, in their world. And so
One of the band of
yeah, it's
brothers.
it's really fun. And it was funny. I was saying to someone the other day because someone sent me a band that I really like. And they're like, you should try to sign this band. And I went, God, I just love them so much that there's a part of me that sometimes when I find a band, I just want to be a fan. And
Right.
I don't want to hear all the demos and I don't want to play with the sequence. And I want to hear what they want me to hear.
You don't want to see behind the curtain and I'll know what's
Yeah, you just want to hear the like it's like that I'm sure with people that work in TV or film like you don't want to see every cut and every angle and every flub and every you just want to see the art they're going to present to you.
right.
And so and then but when you do cross that line and you get in there it's like being in a family and you want to be
Right.
you just want to be a part of it. So sorry to answer your question, it's a
Yeah.
courtship.
Yeah.
It's a courtship, yeah.
One of the things in uh, your first book, I think one of your first chapters,
Mhm.
and talking about your, I don't know, 16 years old,
Yeah.
you're in the punk scene in LA, you're in your little collared shirt
Yes, Argyle sweater. Very
in
awkward.
these punk clubs or
Yes.
whatever, and uh, I just I just loved that and just saw that how you're like this fish out of water, but you actually totally belong there, and you really found your your path at an early age. I have a client right now who he gets really pissed at his friends that found that at an early age, and he's like, "Oh, these assholes! They knew what they wanted right from the beginning, and I'm still searching." And that's pretty amazing uh, thing to have found at such a young age.
Well, I really, and again, if we're going to come out of the closet together, we're family, Rod. So,
Okay.
so we know everyone involved. So it's really my brother Tony, and I just say that because you know Tony very well.
Right.
I was a late in life baby in the family, so my brother at 14 all of a sudden had to share a room with me.
Right.
Poor guy. So 14 years old and a baby, and God
Right.
bless him for dealing
You
with
still
that.
owe them till today.
Yes, and so that's really how I got my love of music was from my brother and sister and my cousins. I remember going over I remember Linda having Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and just diving into that record and
Right.
we grew up in a time when you only heard the music that was either on the radio, you owned, or your friends had. And so for something like um like that Elton John record, which was just, in the culture. There's no way to hear it unless I went into Linda's room and heard it on her stereo.
Right.
Because
Linda's my wife, for those who
yes, sorry. And Linda's my cousin. And for Tony, he was playing this mix of, you know, Black Sabbath, The Doors, Creedence, Linda Ronstadt, the Eagles, and I just absorbed all this stuff and just fell in love with it. And that was really the catalyst for music.
Right.
And then the ability to go to the punk shows at 15, 16 years old came because I was a late in life baby. I was talking where my brother was wrapped in bubble wrap and sort of not allowed to do anything. The accident came along, and I just kind of got a list of 10 things not to do. And it was like a
Right.
show, and they're like, okay, they just didn't know what kind of where it was. Had they seen the environments I was in, I don't think they'd be happy. Uh, it was so I owe so much to my brother Tony
Yeah.
for really opening up that artistic part of my brain and just exposing me to so much stuff at 5, 6 years old. I just remember knowing when it was music time, and so it really is
Yeah.
100% to him.
Plus the universe put you in the right place in the universe, and the fact that you're in LA.
Yeah, yeah.
Me, when I was 15, I'm living in Tri-Cities, the dry shitties, as we used to call them, Eastern Washington, in the small towns. And there was no scene. I
Right,
had no idea of punk. We
right.
had our AM and then FM radio and our cassette tapes, and you know, we got exposed to what we got exposed to.
Yeah.
And usually later, as it came along later.
No, well, that was it. It was wild because we lived outside of the city, but drivable to the city. So as
Right.
soon as like my first friend learned how to drive, that's what just to what you were saying, then all bets were off. We were going into the big city
Oh yeah.
and doing whatever we could. And one other person I really need to mention, when I was 13, I met the gentleman who's my best friend at 13 and remains my longest friend to date. And I was playing a little guitar then and trying to learn guitar because every kid wants to learn guitar. And I met this guy named Adam Levy, who is now one of the preeminent jazz guitarists out there, and he's wonderful. And at 13 was the first moment I realized that. I was like, oh, dang, some people are musical. And I wasn't musical. I was learning to cook. I wasn't a
Right.
cook. And
Right.
I walked into Adam and went, oh my God, like you can do that. And that's the moment I literally threw my guitar away and said, I want to work with people like you. I'm not good at never be good. And I literally at that point I just went, this is not my path. My path is to work that. And he's the one that got me at 19. He was going to a music school. He met a woman who needed an intern. I was sitting there going like, I just want to do this more than anything. And I have no idea how to break in. And so I just really stepped in it. I just really got lucky and met a friend who introduced me to someone who got me an internship. And if it wasn't for that, that was the only way I got in because none of our family was, in the industry. We didn't have
Right.
any entertainment. And so it's funny, I say to people, even though I was in LA, it was as far away to me as it was to you as a kid because it was just okay, I know it's over there, but I don't know how to get in the door. It's and so I really owe it to those are the two. My brother and Adam are the two that really helped lead me into Narnia, as it were. But it
Awesome.
was I did have access to it, like I said, which was great.
Going back to your books, I learned so much
Right
that,
on.
there's always stuff to learn. And, the first book covers, punk scene in LA from 77 to 82, and then More Fun in the New World is 82 to 87. And just, and just the different musicians that you have and selected, just amazing to understand that whole scene and how beautifully crazy and
Right.
creative that was. And how did you get the idea for the book?
Well,
Was it
so when I was
was it
13,
your idea, or was it John's idea? John Doe
it
from
was my
S?
idea. It was my
Okay,
idea
well
that
done.
berated him for 20 years. That's the reason I'll say so. So I met him.
Right.
That was the band that sort of rewired my brain a little bit. Went like, oh my God, art and music, and what is this? And it's this other culture that was sort of in the shadows at the time. And I walked into it, and it didn't. That's why I said, well, I never really dressed the part of a punk or felt the need to adopt it because I never let go of what I loved before. I love my Linda Ronstadt records as much as I love my punk records, and I did at the time. And I didn't think I had to be wired into just,
Right.
you can only listen to this one thing. But when I was at Elektra and that band, and John's band was X, and when I was
Right.
there, I didn't know any of them, and I just said I'd love to do a box set or some kind of compilation with this band. And the label said, okay. So I set about ringing them all. And through the process of we put together something. And through the process, John and I became pals. And the 13-year-old me, every time we went out, was trying to draw stories from. We'd go for a drink, we'd go for dinner. I'd be like, so what happened here? And I know these little stories, but whatever he told me was like way better than anything I'd ever heard. And I was like, you need to write a book. And he was like, absolutely not, never. And then what happened was 20 years later, uh, myself and his lady, now his wife, Chrissy, she started to bug him too. And then it was his idea that really launched the books. Where I was just like, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. And he went, I wouldn't, he didn't want to make it about him. He didn't want it to be just his perspective. And so he came up with the idea, what if we got a lot of other voices in there? So then it's everybody's truth. It's not just my truth. And he wanted to really set out, which I loved, sort of what you just said. Instead of writing just a music book, let's write a history book and make it like, this is what happened in this era. This is the truth. And it's not just my truth. It's the people that were there's truth. And that was the moment it kicked in. And then he challenged me and he said, all right, I'll do it if you do it with me and you go find us a deal. And so I was like, oh, F word. How am I going to go find a book? I have no idea. So I literally went on Facebook and went, does anybody know how to get a book deal? Something like that.
All right.
And I got a bunch of suggestions, and here's an agent, here's an agent, here's an agent. And I got about 4 or 5 names, and I called all of them. And the only thing all those calls had in common was how fast everyone hung up on me. And I was kind of like,
Exactly.
I
No,
want to, yeah, I want to write a book about a scene that never really made that much money, and no one really knows the people that much. It was like, yeah, click. I was like, sorry, I just interrupted you.
right. No.
And then at one point, then a drummer for this aforementioned band that I signed 30 years ago, the old 97s, just went, I went to high school with the girl who became an agent, and she lives in New York. And I was like, sure, I'll talk to anybody. And I talked to her, and she was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I love the idea. Purely, might I say, on the name John Doe, not on the name
No.
Tom Savage.
Sure.
I was
Of course.
like, I want to be clear to all I am the John Oates in this relationship. So I'm the second fiddle. That very happy.
Yes, but you and John are still together.
Yes, we are. We were the band is still together, but it was his name and the names he could bring in and the story coming from him. And right away she went out and she found us a deal, and then we were like, oh, F word. Now we have to write a book. Oh shoot,
Right.
we had 1 year to do it. And so again, it was John's idea to go like the whole scene really started in 77, like I said, and then imploded in 82. It sort of ended. It sort of, we said in the war of punk rock and heavy metal on the strip, heavy metal won. And this sort of died away, and Guns
Right.
N' Roses won that war. And now when I say war, it wasn't a war between musicians, but like that, those scenes both happening concurrently. And so he came up with ideas like, let's just do the first 5 years of it. That's the way to tackle it.
Right.
And so that's what we set out to do, and we got a bunch
Well, it's fantastic. Again, both of them are just great books. And did you do any of the editing? Did you help any of the other authors?
yeah, so John
Yeah.
and I wrote, yeah, so a lot of people wrote like they one of two things. There's in both books, some people that didn't want to write, I just interviewed them and then we
Okay.
turned it into a chapter in their voice.
Okay.
In other cases, and there were some people that just came and just nailed it and just,
Who were some of those people that nailed
oh
it
my God, there was a woman named Pleasant Gehman, Jane Weedlin, Phil
from the
Allen
Go-Go's?
of the Go-Go's.
And
Yeah. I
people
mean,
are, you'd be surprised. This is a book about punk and has a lot of stuff from the Go-Go's and a lot of their
yes.
stories.
Well,
And
and
people
that
would
was
people would never say Go-Go's are punk.
well, and that was sort of it. We wanted to redefine punk because there's an image, understandably, that the world has of, safety pins and
Yeah.
spitting on each other and those things and
Mosh pits
mosh
and black
pits, which
eyes.
which all existed, but really
Yes.
the original punk scene in LA specifically was really
Much more
born out of
loving.
like, yeah, like rock and roll
Much
and
more loving.
Eddie
Yeah.
Cochran and very community based
Yeah.
and very open towards genders and sexualities and all this stuff. So many women in the scene. It was,
Right. And then the Orange County people came
and then
in.
the hardcore people came in and it became, and then the really who ruined it was the business people really are the ones that
Of course.
we always do. Uh,
Well, thanks a lot.
yes, we're always in there to F it up.
Please
But
stop that now.
yeah, so it's always good. That's one truth you always have. That in any form of art, there will always be someone from the business that will come in and try to ruin it, and it's the artistic person's point to know when to ignore and avoid those people, and that's the real talent. Um,
That's
but
your talent.
well, it's you try to look. Someone told me early on is like the one stink you won't get off you as a musician not liking you. You could
Right.
wear a badge of honor having a business person not liking you, and
Right.
but I work for musicians. I work for musicians.
Right. And it's very similar what you do. Uh, we'll shift to this topic because it just popped in. And what I do are very similar.
Mhm,
We're both guides,
yes,
right? So, as a therapist, a lot of people might think, well, a therapist is someone who tells you what to do. And I'm like, I don't tell anyone what to do, or they give advice. I don't give advice. What I do is I help the person discover the answers that they're looking for
exactly.
and help them then make decisions that are their decisions that make sense to them. Because a lot of my clients will say, Rod, I know you won't tell me what I need to do here, but can you tell me what I need to do here? And I'm like, all that means is that we just haven't helped. What we need to do is continue to search and find the answers that you seek that will have that aha moment. So we have this catalyst that we can then use to promote change. And, I know that one of the things that you loved when you were in working in the studio with artists was the sequencing,
Yes, yeah,
right?
that's my favorite.
And
Yeah,
and I think that's one of the things that the younger audience with streaming and stuff just they don't get that gift anymore. So like one of the first albums that I really fell in love with was Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow.
right.
And in the sequencing from songs, the transitions, fantastic. Just like Green Day, American Idiot, the
Oh,
sequencing where most of the songs start out with the drum beat. And they're just so well put together. And if a certain song would have been before another song, it would have had a different thing. And I think that was one of the things that I learned about you is that, that you tend to say yourself, you put yourself I'm not creative, but you're extremely creative. And you look at all the things that you've done and all the people that you've helped, but you really are a great guide and helping people put things in order, in the right order is what a therapist does too. What are we the first thing we need to work on? Is it your relationship with depression, relationship with anxiety? We need to get off drugs, and so you are a guide.
well, and what you just said is exactly it. You could sub out either of our careers, for what you said. I just am always, I'm in awe of creative people. I always have been. That's
Well,
magic.
look in the mirror.
Well, but it's like when
Some
I
awe.
actually create music and and a song comes out of nowhere, it's still like I'm a like 6-year-old kid watching a magic trick going, how did you do that? It's amazing. And when you find people, and like I said, it's really, and it's the same, I'm sure, with your work, there's a point where that a trust happens and an empathy happens and an understanding happens. And I always say too, every artist I work with is a fingerprint. Everybody wants something different, and I don't ever expect every person to have the same thing. I have writers who um, send me bits of songs as they're coming together. Like here's half a bridge, or here's an idea for a chorus, or this is a melody out in order. Here's a lyrical line out in where it's going. And some things I literally hear at the point of conception, and I love that. I have other writers who will send it to me when it's finished and it's done, and I love that. And so with each person, and that's what when you said like my favorite thing to do or contribute to are two things, and one is sequencing because just like I said, I love that point of telling the story, which I will say, and I'm really happy about this, is coming back, and it's coming
Cool.
back at a really young level where there's people that have gone through, and I understand it's a generational thing, and I went through my own generational things where we've been in a I don't want to say short attention span, but like here's a song, move on to the next, which is really how it was at the dawn of MTV. You didn't really have careers, you had hits. It
Right.
wasn't until like the mid 80s when like U2 and bands started to come out and started to really present, and you all of a sudden you were like, oh, I know 5 songs off this album, not just one. I'm gonna buy that album. And but I love that point where it, like you said, it takes you through the journey
Right.
with of the album, and a great one will do it. And just what you said, like just swapping a song here or there. And I don't always come in with the right suggestion, but I'll come up with a suggestion sometimes, or a band member will, or a producer will, or a manager will. And when you find it, you just know it. You're like, oh my God, that's the sequence. That's how the story's told.
We solved the equation.
And I love that. And that my other favorite thing to do is pulling out songs from the trash because every songwriter, every musician, every like here's something they decide they don't like it, or they play it to one person who doesn't like it and they throw it away and they never want to go near it again because they're like it's tainted. And as soon as I get trust with someone, I'm like, please give me your trash. And then I always it's like what's that show, the dumpster divers show where they go into the people's storage unit, Storage Wars.
Right. Yeah.
Become Storage Wars because you go in there and you're like, you were throwing this out. You're an idiot. Oh my God, this is incredible.
Right.
And so those are my two favorite parts. If I had to pick two favorite parts of it, it's the sequencing and rescuing
Right.
orphans, you know?
Well, that's cool. You did mention Linda Ronstadt a couple of
Yes,
times as being one of your favorite artists, and you got to work with her.
I did.
What was that like?
That was amazing because so when I was 8 years old, I got an album from my brother called Heart Like a Wheel. And it was the thing she was my North Star in she didn't write her own songs. And so these records became treasure maps for me as a little kid. I was literally looking at these records going, oh my God, who's Nick Lowe? Who's Elvis Costello? Who's Jimmy Cliff? Who's, any of these people that were who's Mick Jagger? I was 8 years old. And
Right.
so, by the time I was, 11 years old, it was who's Elvis Costello? Who's, this is how I was hearing these songs. And so these records became so important to me. And then because it was an 8-year-old foundational thing, I followed her through her career, which
Right.
became completely eclectic. So then it was like, okay, we're going into opera now. We're going into jazz. We're going into French Cajun music. We're going into opera. We're going into traditional Mexican mariachi music. And so really, I never went to college. And I always say Linda Ronstadt was my college because it took me down so many paths of so much music and so many musicians where I went like, wow, who's Ry Cooder? This is amazing. Who are these people? And then when I got to Elektra, it's sort of a funny story. I didn't want to work with her, much for the reasons I said before. I'm like, I'm a fan.
Right.
I don't want to I don't want to meet her and have her be
I
an
don't want to tarnish any of the image or
yeah,
the
like what if
love.
she's an idiot? What if she's an awful person? What if like and so I was sitting in my office one day and I knew she was making a record with the producer Glenn Johns, who produced everything from the Beatles, to The Who, to Led Zeppelin, to The Clash, to I just name it. He's one of those producers.
Never heard of any of those bands.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
A bunch of husbands produced the first couple of Eagles records, produced like all the just Stone Zeppelin, just
Right.
insane.
The
And so
Giants.
they were making a record together for the first time in the 90s. They had met while recording, I think, the first Eagles record. So someone at the company told me they were, and I was at the company. So I was at Elektra while she was recording for Elektra. And someone said she's in with Glenn. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. So one day my my assistant screams out to me, he's like, hey, it's Glenn Johns on the phone for you. And I kind of went, no, no. So I was
You
like,
sure
oh,
that's the right extension?
it's one of my friends is messing with me. So I answer the phone. I was like, hello, Tom, it's Glenn Johns. Listen, I'm working with Linda, and I was talking to someone. I found out you're a big Linda fan, and we'd love to bring you in to hear the record and have a champion there at the company. And I'm going, this is one of my friends. I go, yeah, look, I'm real busy right now, Glenn. And I hang up the phone.
Oh, crap. Right out of a
Completely,
Hollywood movie.
completely certain it's that. And so I hang up and I'm like, and then I call a friend that I think back, that I think it was. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I'm just having a tough day. I was like, don't F with me today. He's like, I didn't call you. And I went, then my sister goes, um, it's Glenn Johns again. He said you hung up on him. Now my heart has sunk
Oh,
down.
crap.
I pick up the phone. I'm like, hello. And he's like, hello, it's Glenn. You hung up on me. And then when I explained to him, I thought it was a friend effing with me. He was kind of charmed by it.
Yes.
Luckily, thank God.
Uh,
Like, I really didn't think it was you. And he said, look, he's like, and I knew his son a little bit at that point. We had met and become sort of friendly. And so a couple of people just went, hey, there's a guy there doing A&R who's a Linda fanatic. And he's like, we need one of those. And it wasn't like they didn't need me to help them make a record. They wanted me to run around the company waving the flag for them. So I went,
sure. Yeah.
heard the record. It was that particular record was her and Tom Petty's Heartbreakers basically on the entire
Wow.
record. It was just this
Right.
fantastic record that unfortunately she didn't tour behind. So it didn't get heard them. But I ran around the company as it was done. And then they decided to make a record with Emmylou Harris and Glenn. And so that point, he brought me in, and I was just, like this, and got to be in that process and went on tour with them a bit. And then Linda asked me to do a box set with her, and so I did a box set with her and did a Christmas record with her and a couple of other things. And she turned out to be the smartest, funniest,
Mm.
most foul-mouthed, which I wasn't prepared for, which was great too. Just talk like a trucker. It was great. And most musical person I'd really encountered. When I say most musical person, because she had this legacy of experience and this
Sure.
knowledge, and I just learned so much about the creative process to her. And I was making records at that point, and I was making them with these little bands, and we're making them on modest budgets.
What bands? What
In
bands?
studio, this band, the Old 97s, had a guy named Scott Thomas. There's a bunch of acts I adopted that were on the label that didn't have an A&R person. I loved working with I love being in the studio and witness as much as I can. And with Linda, I was making, I remember, an Old 97s record and a Linda record simultaneously. And we had a budget where I'm calling them going like, okay guys, like really the food budget is sandwiches for the rest of this thing because we're running out of money. Take
Right.
it. And then I'm talking to Linda and she's like, there's a piano in this bar in San Francisco that's just got the tonality that I just love and I need on this record.
Fly it
Can you have it moved from that bar to Skywalker Ranch where we're making
in.
the record? And so I'm literally, me and my sister are arranging for a new piano to come into this bar while we take the bar piano that she loves and bring.
Wow.
And so I had and she's earned it. She's sold 100 million records, so she can do
Right. Not going to say no.
it. And but just having this
Right.
dichotomy
Feast
of
and famine.
things, it was so much fun. But she was um wonderful and giving and just funny as hell, and just watching her create. And of course now she's suffering from sort of it was originally diagnosed as Parkinson's, unfortunately became a more serious diagnosis.
Right.
That so she can't sing anymore. And I'm just so, I don't use this term often. I'm just so blessed that I was able to be there and see her
Sure.
use that instrument and and I did nothing creatively. She was just kind enough to let
Right.
me come in and watch. And so it was amazing.
I'm sure that it's pretty stamped in the first time you met her. You walked into the studio and there
Oh
she
yeah.
was, or like,
Yeah. It was very like, yeah, it was like, oh. And I think she's used to it at this point in her career. I think she's just people coming in and just being like, and
right.
she's so disarming and she's so um, humble and so doesn't feel she deserved the success she had, doesn't think she's that good a singer compared to other singers. I remember, she was just just it was as great an experience as I could have asked when I didn't want to meet her,
Right.
and I was like so glad
Exactly.
I did, and it was
Well,
wonderful.
cool. I'm going to circle back now.
Yes,
I've
go.
got a sheet in front of me with a gazillion things on there. We're not getting all of them, but one of the things that I learned from the books is also the influence of like the rockabilly, the that was in the punk scene,
Yeah,
that you know I really didn't, I wasn't exposed to, ever really knew about. But you don't think about, guys in cowboy boots and
right.
singing, kind of a country rock, or, to be part of that punk scene. How did, it's wonderful, the storytelling about how all these characters came together and kind of just made it work. And it's nothing what you just think of punk scene in LA as just being a bunch of young, rowdy Mohawk guys. It
Right.
was actually so deep and complex and just again, beautiful.
Well, that's why we wanted to do the book because I was always fascinated because I liked all punk music, but we started to dissect it. And look, I'm not the first person to do this. Many historians have, but if you look at sort of the three major original punk scenes, there have been many regional ones since in different states and
Right.
different countries, but the most influential, you're starting with the UK.
Right.
And the UK really came from sort of an art movement and really reggae. And it was really a lot of the stuff you hear, a lot of Public Image albums and things that came out, like the rhythms they're experimenting with really were African rhythms or Caribbean rhythms or and reggae was a really big influence. And so it really came out of that. The New York scene really came out of both the art scene and then clinging on to the UK scene. And the LA scene, which obviously everybody took bits from everywhere else, but the LA scene really came out of, uh, yeah, rockabilly, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, um, Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, the Carter family, all these disparate points of music and really like roots music and the guitar playing in that. And so every scene sort of fused its own thing together. And that's when you say the Go-Go's, because that's one thing I want to say that we we wanted to sort of reframe the way people looked at punk as just like razor blades and safety pins
Right.
and really the Go-Go's came out of the punk scene, and people don't know that.
Right.
They grew out of
I
that
was like,
scene.
what?
They were doing that thing, and it's funny, and it's like, and so did Los Lobos, and so did the Blasters, who were just basically doing rock and roll. And there was such a camaraderie in the scene that they were just all kind of like, we kind of all don't fit in. So why don't we all not fit in together?
Right.
So the scene, so you'd go see a show, and a lot of this was before my time. I wasn't, the
Sure.
first book, I wasn't in the scene. I was home playing Legos, just
Right.
learning this stuff.
Sure.
But it was when it was starting to seep into my consciousness. But if you go look at some flyers, then it was Los Lobos playing with X, playing with the Go-Go's, playing with the Minutemen, playing with whatever band was traveling through. And so it was really to frame it in the idea of almost like it's an art movement that had a lot of angles. It's almost like saying Art Deco and going, Art Deco
Right.
isn't just one couch or one,
Right.
one mirror, one building. It was an art scene, and I started to look at it because that was how it was for me with things like Basquiat and different artists from New York. By the time it reached me, it had already happened in New York, and it was part of this cumulative scene that sort of came off of the Warhol movement, which was also very influential in the punk scene in New York, very influential. And so you kind of went, it was like, oh, this is just another art movement with a lot of tentacles out of it. So we wanted to reframe it. And one of the things that's funny, to go to what you said earlier, when we wrote the book, which was right about the time the Me Too movement was happening. And so a lot of people were coming to John and I was like, it's so great you put so many women in this book and so featured so many photographers and musicians. And we both stopped and went like, oh, wow, that's a happy coincidence. But that
Yeah.
wasn't,
We didn't set out to do that. It just
we just
happened.
went to the people that were in there. And it's funny because like the majority of the photographers were women. And that was like being a war photographer. I mean, that was because you weren't seen, you weren't a slam, and the musicians and it was so much of a community that really took care of each other. But it wasn't until the business came in and started to masculize it, if that's the word. We'll say
I know
masculize it.
what you mean.
Let someone create that in the
Masculinize
comments.
it.
Masculine, something. They tried to do that, and tried to, and marginalized different parts of it and marketed it differently. But if you went to that first scene and what it was really just a natural creative process that had probably, in a lot of ways, like it was probably equal gender split in the scene
Yeah.
then, which I didn't realize until we started digging this book. And I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Very cool. I'm going to jump into another. I'm going to
Yes.
jump away.
Go.
Uh, my question for you is, are songwriters starting to get paid fairly? I
No.
remember a client working with Grammy award-winning songwriter, had like 5.5 million streams and got paid $1,500.
No. Yeah, that we're still there.
Okay.
It is, and I believe we'll get better. But it's really tough. You have musicians that with the as much as I love streaming and the ability to get all the music we can, after post Napster, music sort of started to seep into people's consciousness as being free, like something you turn the tap on and it's just there.
Right. Yeah.
It's easily accessible. I get it for $9.99 a month, so I'm paying for it. What they don't know is the musician's getting 0.0003 cents per play,
Yeah.
and it's very different from. Look, musicians have been marginalized and ripped off since the minute there was a
Oh,
contract,
yeah.
and
Since,
probably
right.
before,
Early days.
because musicians are very easy to manipulate to go into this world because musicians are someone who literally cut their chest open and drop their innards out
Right.
and are not, brains are not wired in most, and I want to preserve that too, to be a business person. Your job is to be a
Right.
creator, and you're supposed to be taken care of by the business people that
Yeah.
surround you. That doesn't happen.
Right. And it should be taught. So, I went to Musicians Institute
Sure.
back in the days when it was a 1 year kind of boot camp. And there was no class on, okay, the business of being in a band, or how to get an agent, how to market yourself, what's a contract, it's all just about just the music. And like you said, yeah, artists, you don't get in it thinking, okay, I'm gonna get in a band and now we're gonna be a business and I'm gonna need some business acumen. And no, it's like someone offers you to sign you, and it's like, yeah, sure, we'll sign anything. Someone wants us, and then they get screwed.
Well, and in advance, everyone's like, "Oh, they're going to give me their money." It's like, no, we're loaning you some money.
Right.
We're going to take it all back.
Yeah, exactly. With
Um,
interest.
but the problem is really is musicians haven't totally, and there's some people doing great work at getting there, but we haven't yet reached the part of really unionizing musicians yet.
Right. Right.
And because once, I've seen like if you take music out of the world,
Oh,
we we would crumble.
I
And
would.
We haven't figured out, and everyone would, whether they know it or not. We have it. Music is in all our lives.
Yeah,
It's vital. It's as vital as food and water. And but until such time as musicians can really get together and say, stop. You can't do anything. I'm a chicken and the egg person. Like, I don't have a job without musicians, not the other way around. If I'm
right,
existing, doing what I do, but there's no music, I'm a stump. I'm a tree stump. It doesn't matter.
right. And musicians don't help themselves either by, you know, being willing to be played for peanuts,
Right. Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
and
And it's just, well, we just like playing out, and the fact that, oh, what's a guy make 3 hours? He makes $100. It's like you're not doing it for the money, but at the same time, if all bands started saying no, there needs to be a minimum that you pay any band that comes in.
exactly a
And
thousand
that's
percent.
that's what would happen if there was a unionized type of thing. But sometimes, you're your own worst enemy in that you're charging too little, and then the club owner's going to go, well, why would I pay these guys 2 grand when I can have these guys for 600?
Right.
I don't
Exactly.
care. I'm going to be selling drinks to fill the place. I don't care.
No, and when you just said it, and musicians, and you can answer to this. Like I always say, it's there's not really choice that enters into it. You have to play music.
Right,
And you want to share your music with people, and you want to
right,
play music, so you wind up doing it. And there's in this world and everything, I don't care if you're talking about the music industry or if you're talking about working at the McDonald's. If you're around, 8 coworkers, you might have 7 that are empathetic and caring and lovely, and one of them's going, we could make an extra dollar if we just did this.
right,
And so you've always got those people that will know, like you said, like, well, you have a club owner that's like, I want to curate my place. One of my favorite clubs in the world is Largo, Largo. That's a great club here that is the most curated. Um, you could go there any night. You go see something of quality, that the bands are going to be happy. They're going to feel part of a community. It's going to be a celebration, everything. And then you go to other clubs where you said like that. It's like, well, I can get these guys for 1,200. I get these guys for 600. I just want to sell beer, so I'm going to get the $600 guys and not going to pay them that much. And they might even ask for 1,200, but I know that I can get another band for 600. So take it or leave
right,
it. And the musician that just wants to play,
right.
it takes 600. And so
Yeah. Or back in the day, pay to
600,
play. I remember when we
good day.
played at the Roxy in one of my bands, a band called Mystic Day. Um, we had to sell, hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of tickets just to break even.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
so they made the bands do all the work to bring people in. And I don't know when we made some money that night, I think. But yeah, so
Yeah.
it's
Oh no.
it's a crazy pursuit wanting to be part
But
of the creative clan. That
and
kind of takes
it's
me to my next, kind of psychological aspect of our discussion. You know, what do you think are the the psychological makeup of a person that you've worked with that's been successful as a member of the creative clan? Do you see anything that's kind of unifying there, a
yeah.
particular?
I mean, I love when another thing I love to do that's outside of the creative is I try to teach every writer I have that's open to it, and I find pretty much all of them are, is to really learning the business.
Right,
And so it's like, understand what you're signing, understand what people are, trying to do to you, or how they're trying to exploit you, how they're trying to help you, how all these things. And when someone becomes successful, I mean, I find that slightly insecure thing will always last, but I really don't trust anyone that doesn't have a little bit of that kind of imposter syndrome thing. Because to me,
sure,
all that says is you're just trying to be better.
right,
You're just trying to be better. And if we do this right, we never you never get there. It's just a constant quest to get better. And I just think, like, to the moment you die, you're trying to get better. You
yeah,
never you never get, okay, I've mastered guitar. I've
yes,
mastered singing. You're always going to want to. So I think that bit of insecurity that lasts is actually healthy. It's a driver.
right,
But once someone starts to get successful and understand it, and really get the confidence and start to understand, which I think as humans we all get as we get older, when you're sort of like, oh, this thing that bugged me in my 30s, that doesn't bug me anymore. Why did that bug me so much in my 30s?
Right.
Now have learned to get beyond that. But look, I think the worst thing that's happened to this country, and this is probably going to get me fired, um,
Don't say it.
I'll say it. I'm old. I can say it now. Is really American Idol and The Voice and these things, because not that they're not entertaining shows and they're bringing music to the world, but there's a really insidious thing that comes in with that, which is it's a contest.
Right.
And whereas like what we wanted to get across in these punk books was it was community.
Right.
There's community. And when musicians get together, they tend to be really supportive of one another and
Right.
wanting to help and wanting to share advice and what they've learned. And little things creeping in and the sort of the reality TV world we're in. I think I'll actually say overall, I think it's reality TV that effed us.
Right. It has nothing to do with reality at all, and it's completely scripted and edited. So,
Exactly. But the idea that like an American Idol thing that like, okay, you're all great, but we're gonna be eliminating you guys. And you guys kind
right.
of fight each other.
Exactly.
Like,
The other thing is also, I think it contributed to the death of bands.
yeah, well,
You don't have bands on these shows,
yeah,
and in the 2000s, bands start. You look at the top charts from the 90s or 70s, 80s, 90s, up until that point, bands, 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 bands. You look at the top 10 charts right now, solo artists, solo artists,
right,
solo,
right,
solo, solo,
right,
and so many of them are women that also dance,
right.
and it's like this very cookie cutter thing. Um, do you think bands are going to make a comeback?
Absolutely. I don't know when
Thank
or
God.
how. Yeah, no, I really do. And
Thank God.
it's again, it's never the business. One thing I could say for all these years doing this, these decades doing this, is the business. I love to argue with people this all the time. I can't think of one band that came to prominence. And I'm just going to say, when I say prominence, I mean one of these bands that's like iconic,
Right.
Nirvana,
Right.
Adele,
Right.
like this, where the label knew how influential it was going to be. I'm not saying there wasn't an A&R person or a publicist or a manager who knew. I'm saying a corporation never knows until the music connects with the people. And I remember like at one point after Nirvana's Nevermind came out, and we all loved him. We were all like, thank God this music is, because that was the same thing. There was no bands before then on the radio. It was all like,
Right.
at that point, it was a lot of like smooth R&B and like kind of Michael Bolton stuff. And, like it was sort of like, but it was not guitars and music. And then Nirvana came out and they hadn't yet conquered the world. I remember they played like, I think it was 3 nights at the Hollywood Palladium. And everyone went to go see this thing that was great. But then I remember being in a record store a couple of weeks after these shows, and it started to happen. You started to feel Nirvana. And
Right.
I looked around and went like, there's like 8 people wearing Nirvana shirts in this store. And someone who's in the business was like going, oh my God, this is how it's happening. I remember
Right.
there's an artist, very, very huge artist now named Billie Eilish, who,
Sure.
when I started to hear about her being in the business, was from my friend's daughters who were like,
Right.
they found it. They were, and I was
Right.
like, who is she? Like, she's everywhere. And I was too old to find her at the discovery point, like I was Nirvana. And I was like, oh, this again, it's coming from the fans, it's coming from the people. And what the business is really good with is once something starts to do well, they pour gasoline on it and they can pour money and make it bigger, bigger, bigger. But to your point or to your statement, musicians will always create where the culture is going, and
Right.
that thing has to happen.
Yeah.
That
Artists in general. Yeah.
storm of
Yeah.
of it being able to get out there and be heard, and which is
Right.
hard. But once it is, that's when it happens. And I always say, like the last sort of 20 years, this has been the rock star. It's been the delivery system. People have been more excited about.
It's been the manufacture of anxiety and depression.
Yeah, and it was like people were more like, oh, it's the device rather than the content. And I see us going way more back to the content.
Right.
And people are like, wait a minute, okay, because now when I show like my nephews something I could do on my phone, I'll get an app that turns on a light. I'm old enough to still be amazed by it and go like, oh my God, this is fire.
Sure.
They're born into this and they're looking at me like I'm showing them indoor plumbing.
Right.
They're just like, I'm showing them electricity. They're like, what? We can get
Yeah.
that. Our brains are as excited about your phone as you are, old man, And so,
Right.
and they're more like when they find music, they're lost in the music the way we were. And so it's just going to take a generation.
Yeah.
Generations always save everything. Um, Business people always F it up. There's like we could go on there, we could build on this, build on this, build on this till we're
Sure.
not interested in
Well,
anymore.
one of the things that's exciting to me is there's a lot of popular YouTube channels right now where you have young people experiencing like Rush or Led Zeppelin for the
My
first
favorite
time.
thing to do.
And I
Yeah.
love watching these because, I watched one the other day, this young man, first time he was hearing Stairway to Heaven, and he just kept getting, well, this is really good. And just getting blown away. And then by the guitar solo, it's just like, oh my God,
Yeah.
or hearing, you know, uh, just Rush and like the complicated meters and the lyrics and Getty's voice. And they're like, wow. And I'm like, yes, they're rediscovering. They were deprived because they were fed this bland,
Yeah.
gruel. And now they're discovering what it was like before all this, when bands got together and they created and they went into the studio and they made an album in 5 days, and there's mistakes in it, and there's no mics that make your vocals sound great, and there's it's beautiful. I just love watching these reactions. That gives me hope.
It's funny you said that. Those became my. There's a famous one that happened with these two young kids who were acting to, I think it was In the Air Tonight, that went sort of viral. And they were just like, you see these little kids just
Yeah, I've
going,
seen them. Yeah.
like little kids, like 16, 18,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
and I went down that rabbit hole. And still to this day, when I'm stressed out, when I need to decompress, I watch these kids and adults are doing them too, but I really like the ones with kids because like I said,
Right.
like adults are usually playing you something that they've already heard or they know about.
Yeah.
But when you see something come through and affect someone so much, not only do I love what you're saying about like it's blowing their minds because they haven't heard a non-auto-tune vocalist maybe, or they haven't heard a guitar solo, which a lot
Right.
of these people are having. But it also lets me hear the same music through different ears because you're watching them and you're like, I forgot how cool this is or how
Yeah. Yeah,
process.
I'm kind
Yeah,
of living vicariously through them because I'll
yeah,
I'll start tearing up as they're getting excited. I'm like,
exactly. It's wonderful.
yes,
I'm
you
so
know.
with you, and I make people watch them because it is such especially in the world we're in now, where all the news is bleak and
Oh
everybody's
yeah,
screaming at you and everybody's mad at each other,
and
and you
everyone's
just go, no, that's
paranoid.
just it. And it's music. Music is life.
Yeah,
Music is what heals everything. Music brings us together, and music is the one commonality we can all have. No matter what your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, or whatever you are, it's like you put on a song and I really want the next generation to take it back and not be just reliant on ours and
yeah.
what it came before. And I really think we're in a point. I'll just end this a little bit with this. One of the things that was so inspiring to me is over COVID, both Fender and Gibson sold more instruments than
Ah,
they have in their history and more to young girls than ever
right,
in their history. And I'm like, okay, some of those are going to be parents like, just keep yourself busy over there. But out of that, there's going to be some kids we're going to see coming real soon that have
right.
learned to play an instrument, that have learned the craft of singing, that have gotten away from their laptop and walked outside with a guitar or a bass or went to the garage with a drum kit and are going to do that again. And I really think we've got it bubbling under. I'm seeing some stuff
Yeah.
happening now uh, with musicians that are young that are just going like, "Oh my God, you're reincarnated."
Oh yeah.
So I think
That's
it's a good place.
that's one of the things that in watching the Grammys this year, I was actually like, wow, that was a really good show.
Yeah,
And there was a ton of young female shredders on
yeah,
guitar that were in there, and I thought, okay, it's shifting away because I've watched. There were times in the past where I watched the Grammys and I just could not relate to it.
yeah.
I don't like to say it was bad because it was just part of a creative flow where it was, but it just was bringing me back. There were more kind of bands and people that were actually really trying to create something other than um, dance music
Yeah.
or
Well,
pop hits.
that's a hugely important point, which is touched on. The good thing that's happened with streaming and the Spotify's and Apple Musics and the sites have come along are when we were growing up, we would listen to the radio and the radio would play basically whatever was sort of popular. And so that could be an R&B song, it could be a pop song, it could be a rock and roll song. You know, really in the 80s and the dawn of MTV, they really figured out how to divide everything out and went like, oh, wait, if we take hip hop, we're going to get a hip hop audience. We're going to put that on this station. We're going to take rock and roll, put it on this station. And we're going to take pop music, put it here. We're going to take country music, put it here, and really tribalized it, like made music go into its own bucket. And it's unhealthy because
Right.
my record collection does not
Yeah, I
reflect.
saw you have a couple
So
records.
yeah, this is how like this is my successful
Love it.
relationship.
Love it.
But it's not all one style. It's whatever.
Right.
It's like someone telling you could only eat Italian food or Mexican food the rest of your life. Well, it's like I love both, but I want both.
Right.
And the good thing what's happening with kids now, and I think what's bringing about these reaction videos and bringing about this interest in it, is kids are now, and people, not just kids, everyone is now has an access where they can go in and actually like not have to just eat one food.
Right.
And I think it's really healthy. And I think that's what brings about, creativity and brings about like, oh, wait, what I loved about these Linda Ronstadt records is there'd be a Rolling Stone song, a Hank Williams song, a Smokey Robinson song on the same record, and a Mexican song. But in the sequence we were talking about, they flowed. It was like, this makes sense to me. And when they just try to target market an advertising base is when you get screwed up and it hurts the music. It hurts the
It does.
creativity. It hurts all
It
that.
does.
Yeah.
So I want to close with the I want to hear about your metal education from Professor Lars Ulrich of Metallica, who you worked with.
Yes.
Um, I know that you were not like a metal guy, but and I know there's a story where you're sitting with him, I think in New York or something, getting drunk,
Yes.
and he's like, "What's your favorite Metallica song?" And you're like, "Oh, Sandman." Well, name another one, and you said like Sister Christian or something like
Yes.
that. And so, what was that like?
So that was, yeah, I got assigned Lars. They were saying, do you want to work with Lars? I'm like, great. And it was in this period where the band was sort of a little bit on hiatus. If you've seen the Some Kind of Monster movie, it was right when that was going on, when they were trying to kind of rediscover each other. And so Lars had a label, an imprint at Elektra, so I became his guy, or one of his people there. And I got along with him great. And then he discovered that I didn't know metal music. So when I was a kid, if you liked punk, you couldn't like metal. And if you liked
Right,
metal, you couldn't like punk. So as a result, I saw a bunch of shitty punk bands and missed all these great metal bands and vice versa.
right,
And so I went out with them. And at that point, I knew hits. I knew songs that were on the radio. I knew Rush songs and Def Leppard songs and Zeppelin songs.
right,
And I knew the stuff that was earlier. I knew like Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and stuff, but I didn't know metal.
right.
And so we're out one night and he said that. It was like, and he goes, what's your favorite song? And I was like, yeah, Enter Sandman. And it's like, he just kind of looked at me like, name another song. And I couldn't basically name another Metallica song. And he kind of loved it because he was like, okay, like, because we'd learned to get along at that point. And so we're in New York and he was giving me a lot of shit. And then I went home and this is still in the CD era. I got back to my office and there was a box this big filled with like Merciful Fate CDs and King Diamond CDs and
Full Metal
just all this,
Jackets.
yeah, just all like everything, like from back then. And it was just basically like the history of metal in a box. And it was one of those things like what a reaction, like I said, I was not exposed to it. And because all my friends were into the same kind of music I was, and I was aware of it, but I was like, oh, that's not for me. And it just like it just really opened up like, oh, I like this stuff, not this stuff so much, but this is great. And
Right.
this is so much better than what I, thought it was. And so I really owe it to him to really like kicking open those barn doors and going like, you haven't been listening to it is your problem. And he was absolutely
Right.
right. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point to kind of that circles back to the young people finding music that they hadn't been exposed to, and just how cool that is, and how, it's important for us as human beings to keep an open mind and to be curious. Yeah.
You know what you like? We tend to give a higher weight to nostalgia and sentimentality, which
Right.
is like because it is like I said, when I hear certain music, if I put on, you know, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors,
Right.
it takes me back to just a really I'm happy, and I'm also like, well, I was also a little kid, and I didn't have debt, and I didn't have to worry about politics. I didn't have to worry about employment. And it just takes you back to that innocence. So we love that best. But when we're exposed, when we let ourselves be exposed to more, like I said, it's falling in love. You just hear something, you're like, oh, this is resonating with me. But
Right.
we're so tribalized in the world, under with that, without making commentary, we've been so thrown into um, buckets that we must live in
Right.
that we didn't have before.
Us and them.
Us and them, and turning each other against each other in so many
Right.
ways. And it's like, and that the commonality is art.
Yeah.
It really is.
Absolutely.
That's
It's the
where we find
glue.
that's the
One final question.
yes, of course. I love this.
What
So
was the first album you ever bought with your own money?
first time I ever bought with my own money was at the Kmart in Northridge, and it was Wings at the Speed of Sound. It was Paul McCartney's disco record, the one with Let 'Em In and Silly Love Songs
Right. Right.
and all that. And I remember those were hits. And I remember like going and buying that record and like I listen to it now, and it's really like, especially if you listen to like Letterman and Silly Love Songs, it's really like kind of his response to disco at the time.
Right.
I was so excited because I'd only bought 45s up until that point, and I just cherished that thing. And
Ah,
it was like, and it's not a great album. It's another one of those, like it's a good album with a lot of good songs on, it, but it's not like one of those perfect albums. But it was all I had, and so I just
yeah.
left the tone off and listened to it over and over and over and over again.
Mine was Ted Nugent's first album, Ted
Right on.
Nugent, in '76. And one of the reasons I fell in love with guitar, for sure, that, and again, Blow by Blow, Jeff Beck. And, I was lucky enough that my father, worked in radio his whole life.
Right.
And uh, I came home one day and to find in the front window basically 7 Deep Purple albums
Right.
and maybe a couple of Led Zeppelin. So I'd gotten albums that wasn't, but that was the first one I said, I want this album. I heard, I don't know, Hey Baby or something on the
Yeah.
radio. I'm like, whoa,
I need
Snakeskin Cowboy or
yeah.
Stranglehold. I'm like, yeah, boy. And I still have that album. I don't have the album collection you have, but
No, but that was it. And I same thing. I benefited from my brother Tony and my sister Chris, who he had, they both had Beatles. That was foundational. They both had Beach Boys. He leaned more rock and like Zeppelin, Sabbath, Cream, Doors, Creedence. He loved Linda. That's where I got my Linda thing from. My
right,
sister went more towards like Cat Stevens, Joni Mitchell, um, things like that, which I ate up too. And so I had Elton John. And so I had all that stuff in their collection. So I like sort of
sure,
had these
right.
records around that I had access to, which was amazing for me.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that the people today don't have the pleasure, and they can go find it because the record stores still exist. But going to a record store and leafing through them,
Yeah.
looking at the artwork, looking at the album cover, going and buying it, ripping the cellophane or plastic off of it, throwing it down on your turntable, and
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Well, I have a great shirt somewhere that says, sorry, this might be not for family. You might need to edit this out, but it just
no,
says you can't roll a joint on a digital download. And I think that like pretty much nails it.
exactly. Oh, how many times the album cover? Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you,
on
Rod.
Positive Psych with Rod Loudon, and I can't wait to have a beer with you soon. Let's make it happen soon, okay?
This was really fun. Thanks for having me, Rod.
Oh, thank you. All right, take care
Take care.
and
Bye.
namaste.
Namaste.